It was one of those quiet evenings where the house felt almost too still. I was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through Lucas's tablet to find a chicken cacciatore recipe I'd promised to try. I wasn't looking for trouble, just something new for dinner. Then a little notification slid across the top of the screen. A name I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might be a delivery update or a message from one of his colleagues. I tapped it without thinking. But the words that appeared made my stomach drop. "She can't give me pleasure the way you could." My hand froze mid-air, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, the room felt heavier, like even the air had turned against me. I scrolled up, my fingers trembling. The more I read, the more it burned. Weeks of flirty, intimate messages, inside jokes, late-night confessions. And then it hit me. The name at the top, his ex, of all people. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my face stayed calm, as if I were just reading a recipe. I leaned back in my chair, the tablet still in my hands, my reflection faintly staring back at me from the dark edges of the screen. My first instinct was to slam it shut, march into the living room and demand an explanation. But something in me, colder, sharper, whispered to wait. If I confronted him now, he'd only twist it, find a way to cover his tracks. I knew Lucas. He was quick with words, slippery when cornered. So instead, I kept reading. Each line felt like a little dagger, not just because of what was said, but because of how easily he'd said it. The way he reminisced about her, the way he made subtle digs at me without ever naming me outright. It was almost impressive how he could turn our marriage into a joke for her entertainment. By the time I reached the top of the thread, my mind had already shifted from shock to calculation. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, tapping the screen to take screenshot after screenshot, watching the evidence pile up like ammunition. I could feel the heat in my chest, but my face? Still calm. That was the moment I decided. He wasn't just going to regret this. He was going to remember it. I emailed every screenshot to myself, labeling the subject line so bland he'd never suspect a thing. Something like grocery list. I even attached them to a hidden folder in the cloud, just in case. The sound of his footsteps upstairs made me glance at the clock. He'd be coming down any second. My pulse slowed. I'd already decided there would be no tears for him tonight. When he walked into the kitchen, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong, I smiled right back. He kissed my cheek, asked if I'd found a recipe, and I told him I had. Something he'd love. My voice was steady, warm even, like I'd just spent the evening doing exactly what I'd planned. Inside, though, the wheels were turning. Every laugh, every casual touch from this moment on would have a purpose. Because this wasn't just about catching him. It was about how I'd make him pay. And I already knew I wouldn't be giving him the satisfaction of seeing it coming. That night, I lay in bed beside Lucas, listening to his steady breathing. The same rhythm I'd fallen asleep to for years now felt almost offensive. My body stayed perfectly still under the covers, but my mind was wide awake, replaying every word from those messages. My instinct kept tugging at me, confront him, end it, rip the bandage off. But no. That would give him the chance to lie, to turn this into something it wasn't. Instead, I pictured the way his face would look when the truth finally landed in a place he couldn't escape from. The kind of moment that stripped away charm, excuses, and fake apologies. I wanted that. I wanted control. And I knew that meant staying quiet, at least for now. I turned my head toward him in the dark. He looked peaceful, almost innocent. It was strange. I felt no temptation to touch him, no urge to curl into the man I once trusted. If anything, there was a strange satisfaction in keeping my distance. He had no idea I was already holding the knife that would cut him down. The next morning, I woke before him, slipping out of bed quietly. In the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but I barely tasted it. My laptop sat open on the counter, and I pulled up the email with all the screenshots. Proof, neatly organized and waiting. Just seeing them again tightened something in my chest. But it wasn't sadness. It was resolve. When Lucas came downstairs, I greeted him like always. I poured his coffee, asked about his day, kissed his cheek before he left. The performance felt effortless, almost natural. Every smile I gave him was a disguise. Every "I love you" was a move on the chessboard. As the door closed behind him, I felt an odd calm settle over me. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was planning. And in planning, there was power. The kind of power he wouldn't see until it was far too late. That evening, I made sure everything felt ordinary. Dinner on the table, wine poured, the kind of small talk that keeps a marriage coasting. He laughed at his own jokes, told me about a meeting, completely unaware that every word he spoke only deepened my resolve. I studied him like a stranger, noticing the way his eyes darted when he spoke about his day, the way he avoided looking at me for too long. I realized then that this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about disrespect. About the casual ease with which he could feed me lies and still expect my loyalty. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. The man across from me wasn't my partner anymore. He was my project. So, I listened, smiled, and nodded as if every word mattered to me. Inside, though, I was already sketching out the steps that would lead to his downfall. The trick would be to make him believe everything was fine, while I set the stage for a truth he couldn't run from. Over the next week, I became the wife Lucas probably wished I'd always been. Affectionate, attentive, and just a little clingy. I'd rest my hand on his arm while he talked, laugh a little louder at his jokes, and send him texts in the middle of the day telling him I missed him. Every move was deliberate. I wanted him to feel secure, to believe I was oblivious. It was almost amusing, watching how quickly he relaxed. The little defensiveness in his voice when I'd ask about his day disappeared. He started lingering in the kitchen with me after dinner, telling stories about work, as if we were rediscovering each other. If only he knew the only thing I was rediscovering was how easy it was to make him drop his guard. But behind the sweetness, I was working. I reached out to his ex under the guise of friendship, crafting a message that was warm, curious, and just suggestive enough to pique her interest. I told her about a charity event Lucas and I were hosting soon, and how I thought it'd be lovely if she came. She had no reason to refuse. When she replied with a casual, "Sounds fun," I felt the first real spark of satisfaction since finding those messages. I kept the tone light, even playful, as we exchanged details. She didn't suspect a thing. Why would she? In her mind, I was either clueless or incredibly naive. Let her think that. It only made what was coming more delicious. Meanwhile, I made sure Lucas was locked into the event without realizing it. I slipped it into conversation over dinner, mentioning how important it was for his business contacts, how we'd already promised we'd both attend. He nodded without hesitation, too busy savoring his meal to sense the trap tightening around him. Each night after he fell asleep, I'd lie awake replaying the plan in my head. The timing, the crowd, the exact moment the curtain would fall and the truth would spill into the room. The more I thought about it, the calmer I became. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was art. In the days leading up to the event, I perfected my role. I cooked his favorite meals, laughed at the same recycled stories, even surprised him with little gestures. A handwritten note in his briefcase, a warm coffee waiting in the car. Every act painted the picture of a devoted wife, and he seemed almost smug about it, like he believed he'd won me over again. Behind closed doors, though, I was arranging every detail. The guest list was finalized. Friends, family, colleagues, and of course, her. I booked the AV team, requesting a projector for a short photo montage. They didn't need to know the nature of my slideshow. All they needed to do was hit play when I gave the signal. By the morning of the event, the pieces were perfectly aligned. Lucas was convinced he'd be walking into a night celebrating our marriage and his professional standing. What he didn't know was that by the time it ended, he'd be walking out with both in ruins. The night of the event, the air felt charged, almost electric. The venue was glowing under soft golden lights, tables dressed in white linen, the faint hum of conversation filling the room. I greeted guests with warm smiles and light touches on the arm, my dress chosen not just to flatter, but to command attention. Lucas stood beside me, beaming, shaking hands, completely oblivious to the storm gathering over his head. When she walked in, I felt my pulse steady, not race. She was dressed to impress, scanning the room with that mix of curiosity and confidence. I approached her as if we were old friends, exchanging a quick hug, my voice dripping with charm. Lucas caught sight of her moments later, his eyes flickering just enough for me to catch it, a flash of panic quickly buried under a smile. Dinner passed without a hitch. I made small talk, shared toasts, let the wine flow. Every minute was a step closer to the moment I'd been waiting for. And when the plates were cleared, I stood, my heels clicking softly on the stage, and took the microphone with the same calm you'd use to welcome guests into your home. I started the way anyone would, thanking everyone for coming, talking about the cause we were supporting tonight. Faces smiled back at me, glasses clinked softly. Then, with a gentle nod to the AV team, the slideshow began. At first, it was harmless. Photos of Lucas and me over the years, vacations, anniversaries, moments meant to warm the room. I watched him relax, even wrap his arm around the back of my chair. Then the next slide appeared. The text thread. The infamous line, bold on the big screen. "She can't give me pleasure the way you could." A ripple moved through the crowd. Soft gasps, awkward glances, a few muffled laughs. I didn't look at Lucas yet. I kept my eyes on the screen, letting the messages roll one after another. Dates, pet names, plans they'd made behind my back. Finally, I turned my head just enough to see him. His face had gone pale, lips slightly parted, eyes darting like a cornered animal. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Across the room, his ex's smile had vanished. She stood frozen for a beat, then grabbed her clutch and walked out without a word, the sound of her heels sharp against the floor. The silence in the room thickened, every eye now fixed on Lucas. I handed the microphone back to the host with a gracious nod, as though I'd just finished thanking everyone for dessert. Lucas leaned toward me, whispering my name like a plea, but I stepped away before he could touch me. I could feel the weight of the audience's stares, some shocked, some entertained, others quietly approving. This wasn't just a reveal. It was a reckoning. I made my way to the edge of the stage, my movements unhurried, my smile calm. Because the best part wasn't what had just happened. The best part was knowing there was still one final move left to play. Lucas caught up to me near the back of the room, his hand brushing my arm like he could pull me back into whatever illusion we'd been living in. His voice was low, desperate, laced with the kind of panic that comes only when someone realizes they've lost control. I turned to face him, my expression still warm, almost kind, the way you'd look at someone you'd already decided to walk away from. From my clutch, I pulled out a manila envelope, thick and deliberate, and placed it in his hands. Inside were the divorce papers, neatly signed, along with printed copies of every screenshot I'd saved. His fingers gripped the edge of the envelope, knuckles whitening as he glanced around, aware of the audience still watching. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "I may not give you pleasure," I said softly, "but I sure know how to take away your peace." The words landed like a quiet strike, and for a moment, he just stood there, unable to respond. I didn't wait for him to open the envelope. His reaction didn't matter anymore. I already knew the ending to this story. I stepped away, letting the crowd swallow him in a haze of whispers and judgment. A few guests looked at me with wide eyes, others with small, knowing smiles, as if they'd been silently rooting for this moment all along. The music had stopped, the hum of conversation now replaced by the charged silence of a room that had witnessed too much. I kept my head high, my stride steady, as if I were leaving an event exactly as planned. Because I was. This was the finale I'd orchestrated, down to the last detail. At the doors, one of Lucas's business associates caught my eye. He gave the smallest nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had just happened. I returned it with a faint smile before stepping out into the crisp night air, where the weight of the room finally lifted from my shoulders. Outside, the cool night wrapped around me like a clean slate. The muffled sounds of the event faded behind the closed doors, replaced by the gentle hum of the city. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me, but it wasn't chaos anymore. It was clarity. Each step I took away from that building felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he'd tried to diminish. As I reached the curb, a small wave of applause rose from a cluster of guests who had followed me out. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me pause. I met their eyes briefly, accepting the moment without words. This wasn't about their approval, but it didn't hurt to have it. A car pulled up, and I slid inside without looking back. Lucas's world was burning behind me, but mine was just beginning. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what he'd done. I was thinking about what I'd do next, and I had no intention of living quietly.